Chapter 63. Unsolved Murder. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 1 to 9. If one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him, then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city shall take an heifer which hath not been wrought with, and which hath not drawn in the yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord, and by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. And all the elders of that city that are next unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley. And they shall answer and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge, and the blood shall be forgiven them. So shalt thou put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 1 to 9. This is a very important law because it makes clear God's requirement that justice prevail and that every crime be atoned for. The law concerns the discovery of a murdered man. The body is found outside a city. There must then be a jurisdiction established. Which city is closest to the body? If there is any doubt, the distance must be measured. No crime can go without resolution, and, with murder, the rite requires that a heifer be killed to indicate their effort to locate and execute the murderer. The heifer dies in the stead of the killer, the innocent for the guilty. This points to Christ's atoning death. It also tells us that unsolved crimes punish the innocent. There were apparently a few chosen spots for this ritual. It was to take place in some small valley or draw which was neither planted nor ploughed. A rough valley is better rendered. A valley with running water. There was to be running water. The heifer had to be one neither bred nor yoked for work. Involved in the ritual were both the local elders or aldermen and the priests. Unsolved crimes must be a matter of concern to both church and state because they indicate, at the least, a hiatus or a break in the operation of justice. Failures in the justice system are an indictment of both church and state. They mean that evil is out of control, that justice is faltering or failing. Thus, neither civil nor religious leaders can overlook the fact of unsolved and unpunished crimes. The ritual requires them to acknowledge the crime but disavow their part in it. This can only be done by this ritual. No unsolved murder can be bypassed. While the priests and elders declare themselves innocent of the actual murder, by this ritual, they also acknowledge their responsibility to keep their community faithful and obedient to God's law word. In verse 6, the elders must wash their hands to declare their innocence. This is the ritual which Pilate, who knew at least this item of God's law, used to declare himself innocent of Christ's blood. Matthew chapter 27, verse 24. He misused the law since he signed the death warrant. We have references to this ritual washing of hands to declare innocence in Psalm 26, verse 6, and Psalm 73, verse 13. The premise of this law is that the whole community is involved in blood guiltiness where an unsolved murder occurs, unless there is an awareness by church and state of how serious the problem is, and that God's requirements must be met. There is no past, dead, and meaningless history in God's sight. Men may forget the varieties of crimes and murders committed 10 years ago, but God does not forget. It is His law and justice that have been violated, and He will, in His own way, exact His vengeance. The past can be forgotten by man, but never by God. The judges apparently took part together with the elders and priests, but their part was singly to determine which city had jurisdiction. It's interesting to note that even though the body of the victim were found just outside a city and miles from any other, in Judea it became mandatory to measure the distances. David F. Payne very ably summarized the four basic elements of this right. First, the whole community, represented in its elders and Levites, acknowledged responsibility. They were not the criminal, but they were the justice community. By an oath, personal responsibility was disavowed and the outlaw or murderer condemned. Second, by the death of the heifer, they declared that a murderer must die. His life must pay for his crime, for the life taken. Even where the murderer is unknown, a life must be taken. Blood must be shed. This ritual did not prevent the execution of the murderer if he should later be known and caught. Third, by the use of water, innocence was affirmed. Innocence must mark a community, whereas blood guiltiness condemns them in God's sight if no atonement for the crime takes place. Fourth, because men cannot bring about perfect justice, they must recognize God as the source of all justice and invoke His mercy to keep the community from degeneration. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 9 to 13, Paul asks the Corinthian church to deal with offenders as God requires, and thereby meet God's requirements of justice. Moorcraft commented, "The entire community has a responsibility when crimes are committed or injustice done. A community cannot be indifferent to any sin, crime, or injustice in its midst, or else it bears the guilt as well as the offender and is under judgment. When a community shuts its eyes to any evil in its midst and refuses to deal with it justly and in accordance with God's law, then the whole community is under God's condemnation." Forms of this law existed until this century. In Britain, a fine was levied on the district in which an unsolved crime of murder occurred. Unsolved murders were seen as a national reproach. In verse 8, we have a prayer for mercy for all Israel. Not only the districts where the crime took place, but all the country must view an unsolved murder as a burden of guilt until atonement is made. In Judges chapters 19 and 20, we have an account of the rape killing of a Levite's concubine, a wife without a dowry. Although it was an evil era, all the other tribes or clans reacted by declaring war on Benjamin when that tribe refused to surrender the guilty men. This incident reflects this law. Unpunished murder makes a land unclean. A moral dereliction in all is charged to their account. Unless the people protest such a lawlessness, unless they appeal to God for justice, all are guilty in God's sight. This ritual is not performed by either the Levites or the priests. It is the duty of the city elders, because the law of God must be of concern to the civil authorities as well as to the clergy. Action had to be taken where crimes were unsolved. This right did not end the investigation into the murder, it simply established the necessity for justice as a social fact. Without justice, no society can endure indefinitely. Guilt does not go away. It must be removed by expiation, either by the execution of the killer or by this substitutionary death of the heifer. The city elders could not postpone this rite to the end of the year and then have one ceremony for all unsolved murders. This would cheapen the meaning of individual life. Every unsolved murder pollutes the land, according to Numbers chapter 35, verse 33. Murder is a crime against God and His law. It destroys God's image-bearer. In very ancient Greece, murder was a crime against the family. God declares it to be against Him and His law. God requires full and perfect justice in eternity, if not in time. There is no hiding place from God. Our Lord says, "Every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment." Matthew chapter 12, verse 36. God renders not partial but full and perfect justice. His grace and mercy do not nullify His law and justice. The cross is witness to that.